Okay, here is a question from our test review. The terminal side of angle ROP in standard position intersects the unit circle. That's a key word, unit circle. So that means our circle's already been drawn. We know that it is a unit of 1 of some measure. And it tells me it's at circle negative 2/3, negative radical 5/3. And now we have to find out the sine, the cosine, the tangent, the cosecant, the secant, and the cotangent of this circle, of this angle. So, first thing we're going to do is plot negative 2. Why? Because that's the cosine. And the cosine is the x value. And it tells me it's negative 2 is the adjacent side. It tells me the sine is the y value. That's negative radical 5. And then it tells me the hypotenuse is 3. So I'm going to draw my hypotenuse and label it 3. So that's what my angle looks like. And then I'll put theta in there. It's a unit circle where 1 unit equals 3 of something. So now all I have to do is find the sine. Sine is the opposite side over the hypotenuse. Cosine is the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. Tangent is the opposite side over the adjacent, so we could just go negative radical 5 over negative 2, which cancels out the positive, or I don't even have to use my unit circle. I could just take the sine and divide it by the cosine. Cosecant is the sine reciprocated. So that's negative 3 over radical 5, and then I rationalize the denominator. Secant is cosine flipped upside down, with that's easy, negative 2/3 reciprocated is negative 3/2, and cotangent is tangent flipped. So there we have it. Those are my 6 angle measures. Okay, for this example, it says find the exact value of these functions. So on this part of the test, you're not going to have a calculator, and you have to have your 45, 45, 90, and your 30, 60, 90 triangles memorized. If you don't have the right measurements, then this part of the test, it's either all or nothing. You've got to memorize these. So here we are, sine of 60. All right, so let's look down here at my 60-degree angle, and sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So there's my first answer, radical 3 over 2. Cosine of 120. All right. I don't have a 120 down here, so I have to do a reference angle. So there it is. There's 120. And it's in the second quadrant, so I figure out my reference angle is 60. So now I'm going to look down here at 60, and I'm going to take the cosine of 60, which is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. And it's negative because in the second quadrant, cosine is negative. All right, tangent of 315. Notice I don't have a 315, so I have to find its reference angle. So I'll go 315 degrees, and I'll figure out its reference angle is 45. And it's kind of easy. Anything that ends in 5s, the reference angle is going to be 45. All right, so I'm going to come over here. I'm going to take the tangent of 45, which is opposite over adjacent. So it's 1. And then since I'm in the fourth quadrant, all students take calculus, only cosine is positive in the fourth quadrant, so therefore tangent is negative. Cosecant of 210. Once again, I don't have a 210 down here, so I have to do a reference angle. I'll go 210 degrees, and I'm always measuring off the x-axis, so my reference angle is 30. Cosecant is sine flipped. So if sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosecant is hypotenuse over opposite. And it's negative 2 because once again I'm in all students take. I'm in the third quadrant. Only tangent is positive in the third quadrant. So therefore cosecant is negative. Here we go, secant of 225. I already know my reference angle. It's 45. It has to be. It ends in a 5. Excellent. So secant is cosine flipped. So secant of 45 is hypotenuse over adjacent. And it doesn't matter which one I pick because both adjacents are 1. And it's negative once again because I'm in the third quadrant where only tangent is positive. And this is secant, so it's negative. Okay, cotangent of 30. Well, the bright thing about this is it's in the first quadrant, so I don't have to worry about positive or negative. So cotangent of 30 is adjacent, which just flipped over, opposite. So that's a radical 3. All right? Express each given function value in terms of a function value of a positive acute angle. First of all, I look at all of these. They're not all acute. So I have to do reference angles again. So here's 300. If I do a reference angle, it's 60. So I know this is going to be the sine of 60. And why is there a negative in front of it? Because I want the sine of 300 and the sine of 60 to carry the same value. Since I'm in the all students take calculus, since I'm in the fourth quadrant with 300, I know the answer to this must be negative. If I just take the sine of 60, I get a positive answer, so I have to throw a negative in front of it. So now if you took your calculator out, took the sine of 300 and the negative sine of 60, you would get the two same answers. And that's all we're trying to do here, is play a game so that the two answers are the same. Cosine of 100. All right, I got to find an acute angle. Let's do a reference angle. My reference angle is 80. The cosine of 100 is negative because it's cosine in the second quadrant. That means it's negative. So that means I'm going to have to throw a negative in front of cosine of 80 to make it match. Go ahead, take the time right now on your calculator. Take the cosine of 100. Take negative cosine of 80. See that they match up. And you will have a calculator for this part of the test. All right, negative 310. Whoa, that means I go backwards 310 degrees. If I go backwards 310 degrees, that brings me into the first quadrant with a reference angle of 50. So I don't have to worry about throwing negatives in front of stuff, because if I take the tangent of 50, it gets me a positive answer. And tangent of negative 310 will give me a positive answer because it brings me into the first quadrant. All right. For each function value, find to the nearest degree 2 values of x. So I've got to find 2 answers here that when I take the sine of them, I get 0.3747. Well, the first thing I do is I realize that sine is positive in the first quadrant and the second quadrant. So I'm going to take and draw my reference angles in the first and second quadrant because that's all I'm worried about. That's where sine is positive. On my calculator, I'm going to inverse sine 0.3747, round it to the nearest degree, and get 22. So now I'm going to place a 22 in each reference angle. Okay, so there are my answers. This first angle is 22, and to get the second angle, I do 180 minus 22 and get 158 because I'm 22 degrees short of 180. So there's my first two answers. In the next one, it says cosine is negative. There's my circle. Okay, where is cosine negative? Cosine is negative here in quadrant 2, and here in quadrant 3. So I'm going to draw my triangles in there. I'm going to inverse cosine and figure out, wow, that can't be a reference angle. That's 145 degrees. My reference angles have to be between 0 and 90. So I'm going to do a little math here. That angle must be 35. So it's got to be 35 below. So quadrant 3, I take 180 and add 35 to figure out that that's an angle of 215 right there. So there's my two answers, 145 and 215. Tangent is negative. Tangent's negative where? In the second quadrant and in the fourth quadrant. So I'll draw my triangles. I'll inverse tangent, negative 0.5773. I get 30. I'll put those in as my reference angles, and now I just have to figure out how big they are. All right, in the second quadrant, I guess I'm doing the fourth quadrant first. 360 minus 30 is 330. 360 minus 30 is 330.